Welcome to Spindle and Spoon Homestead, your place for simple living and hand spinning. Be sure to check out my blog, spindleandspoonhomestead.com, for all of my fiber art and homesteading adventures. Today I'm sharing a video on how to dye with cosmos flowers. Last summer I grew cosmos flowers in my garden as a dye flower, and they were pretty easy to grow, and I've got some details about that on my blog. Every other day or so I would pick flowers and I would dry them on a screen in my house, and once they're all dried and crispy I could store them for later. And then this past fall I used a few of them to dye some quilt fabric and some cotton yarn. To dye with cosmos flowers, first you need to mordant your fiber, and I'm not including that in this video, but I will include a link in the description on how to do that. Once your fiber is all prepped and mordanted, you want to get it soaking, and then it's time to make the dye bath. So in a pot of water, in a dye pot, you're going to put your dried cosmos flowers, or you can also use fresh. And you want to weigh your fiber and take that weight and use about the same amount of flowers in weight, or anywhere between 20% to 100% of that weight in ounces or grams or whatever you'd like to use. Then once you figured out how many flowers you need, you put them in the dye pot and you simmer them very, very gently. You don't want to boil cosmos flowers or any kind of dye flower, because the high temperatures will make the dye a little duller and more brownish in my experience. So watch your pot carefully and make sure that it's simmering, and you want to simmer it very gently for about 1 hour. Once it's been an hour, you can either strain your dye bath, or if you're just using some fabric, you can put it straight in, because if you're dyeing yarn or something that all the little flower petals would stick to really badly, then you would want to strain this first. But I was dyeing some quilt fabric, and so I just put it right in there. Make sure that you don't stuff it with too much fabric. You want the fabric to be able to move freely in the water. And you're going to simmer it for about another hour. Again, making sure you don't go over a simmer. You can see the fabric is already changing color, but you really got to wait at least an hour for that color to become more permanent and deeper. Stir your pot from time to time to make sure everything is submerged. And once you've decided you're happy with the color and it's a little bit deeper than what you want, then you can strain it and wring it out. Depending on the fiber, you want to be gentle with loose wool, but with quilt fabric you can just wring it out and hang it up to dry. Now I've decided to strain out all of the flowers to get a nice clear dye bath to use for my cotton yarn, because I don't want any little bits of flower petals to stick to my yarn. So I'm using these nice extra large strainers, fine mesh strainers that fit really nicely on a stock pot or a 5-gallon bucket, and just getting all of that extra dye bath into the pot below. You can see there's still quite a bit of color after dyeing that quilt fabric. I'm looking forward to seeing how deep of a color I can get from this cotton yarn. This is Dye-licious cotton yarn. Dye-licious cotton is a special type of cotton grown in the United States that has been specially treated to absorb dye really easily, and it does not need a mordant. So it's very convenient for natural dye. Again, if you're dyeing yarn, you want to be sure that it can move freely in the dye pot to get all of these strands evenly soaking in the dye bath. For the Dye-licious cotton, it just needs to soak in the hot dye bath for a length of time. The longer it soaks, the deeper the color will be. You do not need to simmer the dye bath with that Dye-licious cotton. So it's a really nice yarn to use. At this point, I was a little concerned with how pale the yarn was, because usually it absorbs the dye really fast. So I decided to pour more of my nice strained dye bath just right into the pot on top of the yarn, and I stirred it. And I think I ended up adding quite a bit more of the dye bath, and I ended up with a really gorgeous persimmon orange. Now, don't mind my old broken sink that's in the background. That is for my future dye studio, which will be in that little screen porch. Someday, I am hoping. Anyway, after I dye fabric, I like to hang it out to dry and then rinse it in my washing machine. I actually wash and rinse it on a very gentle cycle to get any extra dye rinsed out. I was honestly shocked by how gorgeous this fabric turned out. It is such a bright tangerine orange. I was not expecting this, and I think it is so gorgeous. Especially with the sun shining through it, it looks like fire. Now, I believe in the end I let this yarn soak in the dye bath for a day or so, but I did notice that the longer it soaked, the deeper the color got, and also the color was slightly more even as it really fully soaked it in. So that's a little tip for dyeing with this delicious cotton. I was really pleased with how these turned out as well, and I ended up calling this colorway in my shop persimmon because it's the exact color of the persimmons that grow here in Louisiana in the fall. So cool. I'm not a huge orange fan, honestly, as a color, but I just love natural dyeing because it really makes me appreciate the beauty of every color. And I was really enjoying this orange. Well, this yarn was a pleasure to dye, and it was a pleasure to work with the Cosmos flowers. If you're interested in this yarn, I have one skein left at this moment, and hopefully I'll dye some more at some point. But be sure to check out my shop for this color, and also I have other skeins in other naturally dyed colors. This cotton yarn is really nice for lace knitting, lace crochet, and also for weaving. It's nice and strong and also super soft. Thank you for joining me at Spindle and Spoon Homestead. Be sure to like and subscribe to get more of my fiber art and homesteading adventures and join in the fun.